welcome to the Talking Crop podcast. My name is Kathryn Seebruck, and I'm a commercial agriculture educator with University of Illinois Extension, serving Daviess-Stephenson and Winnebago counties. Talking Crop is a row crop production podcast with episodes occurring every other week during the growing season between May and September. In each episode, I bring on a guest speaker to discuss topics related to their areas of expertise. In today's episode, I'm joined by Matt Ruark, professor and extension specialist in soil fertility and nutrient management in the University of Wisconsin-Madison Department of Soil and Environmental Sciences. We discuss what soil health indicators correlate with agronomic performance, on-farm research for nitrogen optimization, and how to manage manure and cover crops. In the episode description, you'll find links to University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension articles on soil health, the nitrogen optimization pilot project, and their publication on manure and cover crops. For the next episode of Talking Crop, I'll be joined by Jonathan Koppes and Andrew Hockenberry. Jonathan is a professor of agricultural policy and the director of the Gardner Agriculture Policy Program in the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And Andrew is a postdoctoral research associate in the ACE department. We'll be discussing carbon markets, and that episode will air on Wednesday, August 19th. And now, please enjoy this episode of Talking Crop, Soil Health, Nitrogen Management, and Manure with Matt Ruark. Hello, Matt. Welcome to the Talking Crop podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I wanted to have you start off, like everybody does, by introducing yourself and providing a little bit of your background, what your position is, and what you do in your position.
You bet. My name is Matt Ruark. I'm a professor of soil fertility and nutrient management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I also have an extension appointment in soil fertility and nutrient management as well. So I do double duty there. I also have a couple other roles. I serve as the faculty advisor to our Discovery Farms program, and also serve as an advisor to our Wisconsin Agribusiness Association.
And so I take it then that you have been working in the soil health space for a number of years now. And so I was curious, how has the conversation surrounding soil health, how has it changed since, when you first started getting into this area and today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, where to start. So first of all, I really like the idea and topic of soil health, right? It gets folks talking about soil. So that's always a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then our roles as scientists are to try to take it from just sort of a vague idea about what soil health is or soil improvement is. And often these are things that farmers can see with their own eyes. So it's not that their observations are incorrect, but as scientists, we're in charge of trying to quantify things. And we kind of split our discussions, I think, into sort of two different areas: soil health as measurement and soil health as management. And so you'll hear people talk about, I've improved my soil health, and maybe they're taking some additional soil health tests, which gets into kind of more of the world of soil testing. Mm-hmm. Or you hear people talking about I do soil health practices like reduce tillage, no-till, cover crops, annual crops, whatever that might be, right? Diversified crop rotation, whatever they may be or they feel is helping improve their soil through the management practice they're imposing. So we kind of have two different sort of avenues where, in terms of what we're talking about for soil health. Soil health is what we can measure in the soil, or soil health as the specific management practices. And so this to kind of build on both of those then, right? So, okay, in terms of measurement, what do we measure? So what additional stuff should we be measuring when it comes to soil health, right? And so most farmers are already doing kind of what we call a routine soil analysis for nutrient and nutrient management purposes. Generally pH, generally they're getting soil organic matter, soil test P, soil test K, maybe they're doing some other nutrient tests, maybe, sulfur or micronutrients, whatever that might be, to help guide their fertilizer applications. But then we have the soil health also encompasses some of these other aspects of soil, like the physical condition of the soil or the soil biology. And soil biology has kind of been that area that we've really focused on over the past 6 to 8 years, where we're adding a couple different measurements, like we're doing some carbon or nitrogen extractions. That's what you'll hear, the POC or the permanganase oxidizable carbon or the ACE protein, some sort of extractable pool. It's not the total organic matter. It's, in theory, the more available carbon and nitrogen portion of the organic matter.
Sure.
And we're trying to assess, like, what's the value of that? And then we also have some biological tests where we let the microbes tell us how active they are. Short-term incubations to tell us how much mineralizable carbon exists. And microbes respire just like we do. They emit CO2. CO2 is emitted at the end of their process. And so we can measure the buildup of CO2 as a proxy for how active your soil biology is, right? And then we can also do the same thing on the nitrogen side, where we can see how active mineralization and the nitrogen mineralizers are, where we're looking for a buildup of, depending on the test, right, a buildup of available nitrogen in the soil over time during an incubation. Then, so step one is, well, what are average values, or what are, if you want to compare, you get a soil health test back. Are your values in a good range or a typical range? Are you in the high range? Are you low? How do you know? So we've done quite a bit of work over the past 8 years or so, quantify, and we've done a bunch of on-farm survey work in Wisconsin. We have this nice distribution of samples we've collected from farm fields across the state, and we were able to produce sort of what we call our benchmark. So we can get a handle on what are typical values in the state, what are high values, what are low values. But more importantly, what should we consider when evaluating, right? So there's a couple key things that came out. One is, are you grazing, right? So do you have pasture? So if you're sampling your soils from a pasture, those will always have much higher soil health values compared to grain cropping systems. And that makes sense, right? It fits in with just the general idea of soil health, continuous living cover, connection with animal agriculture. We have, what we call direct deposition of manure to the soil, often multi-species mixes in these pastures, right? So it makes sense, right? You're not tilling the soil. It all makes sense. More living roots. It all makes sense to everyone, right? Okay, so if you're grazing, you got to be over here. You start here. We have a data set for you to look at to kind of evaluate where you are within that. Second thing is, are you on a sandy soil? So we have a big central sand plain in Wisconsin, grow a lot of potatoes. Shout out to the WPVGA in Wisconsin for funding a lot of our soil health work and in this area. But so we have a big central sand plain, and with sands and loamy sands, and those are going to be lower, right? Makes sense to a lot of people. Much lower organic matter, less ability to hold on to carbon with sands. So we have a data set for those folks, right, that are managing on sandy soils. There's other sandy soil pockets throughout the state as well that they could compare and contrast to. And then everything else is in the middle. Everything that's basically a silt loam across our production system. So it's like if you're grazing, you're over here, your sandy soil's over here, and then everyone else, you're in the middle. So we've got kind of three key things of places to start. And then you can kind of look within. And, so a little bit of a spoiler alert, Wisconsin's the dairy state. Guess what? Dairy-based cropping systems tend to produce higher soil health values compared to annual cropping systems, so corn and grain-based systems or corn and soybean-based systems. But again, that makes sense, right? Because what do our dairy production systems have? We have alfalfa, so a perennial crop, deep-rooted. We have manure applications. We generally have a nice long crop rotation in those kind of systems. So it makes sense. So the good news is, like, a lot of our results kind of, it's good that we promote these ideas. What are these soil health practices? Continuous living cover, animal agriculture, diversified crop rotation. All these things make sense and they work in terms of, like, if your goal is to build some of your soil health metrics. So that's the good news. And then so farmers can kind of look within there, play around, compare and contrast to what they feel they should be comparing and contrasting to. That's the most important thing. And then use that to make decisions. Oh, am I a little on the low end for my soil health? We have some other nice work that generally connects soils with greater organic matter, soils with greater soil health metrics tend to be associated with higher yields. So some of the work we did in Wisconsin with this data set shows as organic matter increases up to 4%, so does our kind of average yield. A lot of variation with that for sure, but it does show that there's a trend there. It's positively associated. Mm-hmm. It's worthwhile trying to build your organic matter. It's worthwhile trying to build your soil health, or at minimum, trying to at least offset or trying to maintain those levels, try to avoid decreases in those levels. Obviously, and most farmers that we talk to get it, and they're really interested in really driving the train on all this soil health stuff. They want to invest in their soil, right? And that's what we're talking about doing. And does it pay off? Absolutely, it does.
I like that you guys are looking at providing these benchmarks, because I've heard it said that soil health tests, while great and can be informative, there's a limit to it, because sometimes you get this test back, and what you were alluding to earlier is you get the test results back and you're like, okay, what does this mean? What is this compared to? It might not tell you anything. It's not like, what you're very familiar with in terms of, phosphorus and potassium levels. You have a set, this is high, medium, and low, and you fall within one of these ranges. Ergo, you should do or not do something about that. Mm-hmm. So it's great that you guys have developed that. And what you were referencing is the Wisconsin Soil Health Explorer, which is a resource that you guys have that producers can access very readily, and kind of putz around on that Explorer and look at those values. Yeah.
And we're just rolling that out now. Right now we're in a soft launch, and we're ready to probably roll it out to the general public here coming up pretty soon.
Great. Yeah, that's a really, really helpful resource. And so I was wondering, along those lines, when it comes to soil health parameters, what would you say are, because you listed off a bunch of different parameters that can be tested for, and, there are different tests that maybe have kind of packages of parameters that they provide. What of those parameters would you say are the most, and you could put it into whatever bucket you want. You could say the most trustworthy, the most informative, that tell you the most, or something that's actionable. What would your take be on those parameters and how trustworthy they are?
Well, that's a good question. So I would say, I think we should start with soil organic matter, right? And it's hopefully it's something that everyone should be monitoring. There's some, right. So we have an indication of, right, that greater organic matter associated with a potential increase in yield. So that's good. So that's really kind of the most actionable thing to decide if you're on the low end and you can build, to try to make efforts to try to do that. When we get to the other things, I think there's a lot of it in terms of just the first thing, maybe the bigger question. I don't want to restate your question, but I might here a little.
No, that's okay.
I'm going to go back and forth.
Go for it.
Why would you measure soil health, right? And I think that's a really good question. We try to think through why would someone want to do it? And the first thing is just to sort of start a monitoring process, right? To see which direction your soils are going over time. Are they maintaining? Are they going up? Are they going down? Right. So that would be a good use in terms of, are your management practices maintaining the soil condition? Are they helping improvement, or are you still seeing a slight degradation in your resource? Right. So they would help provide additional information more than just organic matter to try to tell you which direction your soil's going in. The thing that we're trying to build, and most of the efforts are going in towards the idea of connecting some of these soil health practices with nutrient management, right? So if some of the premise is, if we've improved, or we have higher, if you have greater microbial activity, and we're going to use that from that, what we call that mineralizable carbon measurement. Sometimes sometimes the Solvita burst test is kind of the take-home test kit, but a lot of soil test labs are offering it as part of this soil health package. And mineralizable carbon or soil respiration is another term you may see.
Sure.
So if you have greater microbial activity, if you're bacteria are more active, they will cycle more carbon, but they'll also mineralize more nitrogen, which is the conversion of like the nitrogen that's bound in the organic matter to ammonium, and then eventually into nitrate through nitrification, which are the plant available forms. So if then in some sense, if we can come up with a simple test to associate with, oh, your soil is going to supply more nitrogen, that may be an indication that you can apply less nitrogen fertilizer.
Right.
And so a lot of our efforts right now are conducting these soil health tests in conjunction with nitrogen response trials. So we can link up a soil test value with identifying a clear, oh, here's how an optimum nitrogen rate for that site, and see if there's some bigger trends in it. So right now we don't really have the data set to, there's some papers out there that indicate that there might be a relationship with there, where generally greater soil, your greater microbial activity means you can apply a little bit less nitrogen. We're building our data sets in Wisconsin to see if that holds true, and if something we would build into a recommendation system. But what just crossed my mind too is like what we're also doing is we're evaluating soil tests that can be easily incorporated into soil test labs. All right, so that's a big thing. Is there's ones with simple chemical extractions. There's ones with very short-term incubations, maybe 24 hours. Fortunately, the nitrogen one ends up being 7 days for what we call an anaerobic nitrogen mineralization assessment. So we got to still have them, we got to pare down these tests as something that can be easily conducted and built into a soil test lab would offer it. Otherwise, if it's like super long incubations, like historically in our science, we've done 30-day incubations or 60-day incubations, a really complicated series of extractions. Well, those aren't going to fly, or any sort of this genomic, metagenomics tests, right? Or microbiome analysis. That's going to be way too expensive or way too complicated to put into a soil. So we got to find something. We got to find tests that are simple enough to be conducted rapidly within a soil testing framework, but then also still have enough value that it connects to something, right? So that's where all the research is right now. Fortunately, we don't have anything to offer in terms of a recommendation yet, but know that that's kind of where a lot of the research is going throughout the Midwest. Okay.
It'll be interesting to see what you find with that, because with soil, obviously, it's a very complex system. There's a lot at play. I always like to compare this kind of thing to, with like a car with mechanics. If one certain thing goes wrong, you are pretty dang sure all the other things that it's going to affect. But when it comes to soils, you can have a high nutrient level or let's say a low nutrient level, for example, and still get a crazy high yield. And you're like, how did that happen? And so it'll be interesting to see if you find that there is a clear relationship with these studies, or maybe a muddier one, just because of that complexity of, soil and all the different factors at play. You know what I mean?
No, and we haven't even talked about like the physical condition of the soil. Like, is your soil compacted? Do you have good infiltration? Do you have good aggregation? Right. And, and all of those physical, good stable aggregates that aren't degrading rapidly. And, and we haven't really, we're just scratching the surface of incorporating those into our assessments too. Right. So you still have the physical condition of the soil that we don't have built into a lot of stuff yet either. So that's an excellent point. There's a lot of moving parts. I always associate with, here's how I kind of view it, right? So if you think about soil health, and a lot of people have seen that graphic where there's 3 circles, like a Venn diagram, right? You have soil chemistry, soil biology, soil physics. All right. So soil chemistry, it's your pH, it's your extractable nutrients. Those are things that we've been studying for 120 years. We know what to measure, we know how to measure it, and we know what to do with it. Okay. Then we have the soil physical condition. And a lot of times there's some tests that we can do, but often it's like, go look at your soil. Can you get a shovel in the ground? Is it overly compacted? Do you have poor infiltration? That's something you can physically see. As you dig up your soil, does it just fall apart, or does it stick together with good aggregation? Obviously things you can physically see. There's some tests that we can add to quantify it, but obviously there are more things that you can easily observe about your soil.
Yes.
Then you get into all the biology stuff. We don't know exactly what we should be measuring. We don't know exactly what to do with the results once we get it. So that's kind of the frontier of soil science research right now.
that amazes me because there are so many biological mechanisms going on underneath the soil surface, and there's so many species in just a cup full of soil, and you don't know which ones actually mean anything or do anything some of the time. I mean, I'm sure there are some that are very well documented, but and the interplay of those, if you take one out, what happens to the rest of them, like you said, that's going to be really interesting research down the line, but would fall under more of those complex testing strategies that you referenced before too. So that research that'll be really, really intriguing to find out what happens with that. And so moving on then, related to this, right, related to soil health, but looking at nitrogen, you up in Wisconsin, you guys do the nitrogen optimization pilot project, the NOPP. And this is, it's all on-farm research, correct?
Correct.
So the nitrogen optimization pilot project looks at, it's all on-farm research, looking at replicated nitrogen rate trials, sometimes with or without an extra added management strategy on top of it. And the goal is to help farmers find kind of an optimum nitrogen rate. And then ultimately beyond that, reduce nitrate leaching, help, groundwater, all of that really great stuff. And so I know that this is a partnership between the University of Wisconsin-Madison and your guys' Department of Agriculture. I was curious, what was the impetus for this project? Who started it? Whose idea was it? And how did it kind of come to fruition?
Yeah, this came out of some funding offered by the state legislature, and then DACAP, which is our Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. So we got a mouthful in terms of an acronym, but DACAP then was sort of tasked with the idea of coming up with some programs to try to tackle our nitrogen issue, right? We've got it's an expensive input. Overuse can lead to some of our nitrate issues in our groundwater. How do we tackle this? And so early on, we were involved with some of these kind of listening sessions with DACAP to try to, what should we do? What should we do, right? And we kind of came to the idea, and so this is, so it's a collaboration, and it really is, but it really is our DACAP, it's a DACAP program. I kind of view us as, my role as the scientific consultant on the project. Sure. We can go into some of those details in a bit, but the idea of what if there was a grant program where farmers could basically evaluate, they conduct their own nitrogen rate trials to identify what their optimum, what an optimum nitrogen rate might be, compare that to their status quo. On average, are they seeing, I can cut back by 20 pounds. I'm kind of right on. But then also test maybe some other things that they want to test. So we left this wide open. Farmers can test whatever they want to test. And so we've got a lot of grant, or we've submitted, or we funded a lot of projects through the years that compare, what about landscape position in this part of the field versus this part of the field? What if I use cover crops or no cover crops? Does my optimum nitrogen rate change? What about if I use some of these biological products or not? Does my optimum nitrogen rate change? Using manure or not, right? So there's all sorts of things and we kind of left it open of what do you want to study, right? What do the farmers want to study? Sometimes it's placement, sometimes it's timing. What if I put all my nitrogen up front versus a side dress? And so we have this wonderful collection of, at this point, probably over 80 individual projects. We're after 3 cycles and farmers they got to do work over 2 years, but they write the proposal, they do all the work. Our role is to just kind of work with them to make sure the projects are set up well so we can actually get an answer. And then we work with the individual farmer. We help analyze their data, give the information back to them, give them reports, meet with them, and kind of work with them to hey, what did we learn here? So it's been a really great project of getting a lot of farmers engaged with on-farm research, and 2, identifying, how much nitrogen do they actually need? And is it that different than what they're actually doing?
Yeah. And do some use kind of their status quo nitrogen rate? Or I was curious if anyone references the MRTN and does any comparisons to what that kind of states they should be using and going kind of above and below that.
Yeah, and we're so in fact, and what's been kind of a nice dual benefit of this is that we're actually able to use these nitrogen response trials to update our nitrogen fertilizer recommendations, right? So it actually, in terms of utilizing that data to update and validate our MRTN in Wisconsin, which are nutrient nitrogen guidelines in the state. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that the farmers are really interested in. So they feel now that, they become more invested in kind of helping us improve the guidelines. And in a lot of cases, in some cases, especially for the big CAFOs, are kind of used to guide, regulatory aspects of nitrogen applications. So it's been a great collaboration. So and we always have that. We've got really nice data sets where we can compare to what the MRTN says. I think the MRTN needs more data, right? So that's more. I view it more as the improving of the MRTN, and then also compare contrast to what the farmers are doing. And in some cases, we're seeing optimum N rates that are actually a little bit higher than what the farmers are applying. Oh, they're leaving some yield on the table, and if they applied a little more, it actually would be efficiently used, and that's okay. But in a lot of cases, it might be 20 to 30 to 40 pounds less than what they're typically applying. And that's a good kind of eye-opening. Oh, okay. So I consistently apply a little less, gets farmers a little more comfortable with maybe there's some opportunities to cut back, especially in these, with the cost of inputs right now.
And is there any specific technology that a farmer needs to have access to be able to participate? Because from what it looks like, they can either be a part of this program in terms of receiving funding, but it looks like there's also an option for anyone to do it, whether they're officially part of the NOPP or not, correct?
In terms of anyone could run a nitrogen.
Yeah, in terms of that maybe they didn't apply and get funding to help them do this, but they can still utilize the resources that you were referencing to put together a trial.
Exactly.
And kind of do it on their own.
Yeah, no, I mean, the easiest thing is if you have a yield monitor, right? And so a lot of times, and every farmer's got their own different setup. Are they putting out their nitrogen rates in strips where they can variably apply by strip? Some have a little more, if they're working with co-ops, they can write prescriptions to put the rates, down the rows. Then we can come back with a yield monitor and start to work with that kind of data. Some are using weigh wagons on a plot basis or long strip, weighing every plot. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but the more technology that they have on their nitrogen application side and yield monitor side, the easier it is to do. And in fact, we've gone to a lot of people, and a lot of crop consultants are starting to kind of add this to maybe to their suite of measurements as well. If they can do that within a field, especially maybe some of their trickier fields of what's going on here? What value am I really getting from my nitrogen? Then I think that there's ways that there's a lot of automation to the process that could be done. And I'll also say, it's not just identifying the optimum nitrate rate. It's sort of the curve itself, right? Is it a really flat curve? Is it a really sharp curve? Oh, you get a lot of bang for the buck when you're putting out your nitrogen, right? Or is it a relatively flat curve, right? Where it's the difference between the cost of optimizing your production is, quite different than in terms of optimizing your net return, right? Yeah. And so it's the shape of the curve too is almost really valuable. And a lot of comments that we get from the farmers and the crop consultants is one of the more valuable pieces of information is what's the yield with no nitrogen on my farm, And so that ends up telling you what's the real yield gain you get for the fertilizer that you've applied. And they just, it's just another way to obtain more information about your farm field, about your cropping systems that the farmers find really valuable.
Yeah. That no nitrogen check, I know, can be a little bit scary, but like you're saying, it's extremely informative because your baseline is going to be completely different from someone else, or could be completely different from someone else's, and even across fields too.
Exactly. No, and that's really true though, right? Everyone at first is really apprehensive, but then once they get the data back, they're like, oh wow, that was really informative.
Yeah.
And I get
told
it,
me
right?
a lot.
There's real cost to this. I'm not trying to make light of that. There's real cost. And that's what this NOPP project is doing, is hopefully definitely offsetting the costs and then providing some additional, financial incentives to conduct the experiment itself.
I also wondered too, obviously a big thing with reducing our nitrogen rates that can contribute to reduced nitrate leaching is water quality tested for at all in these, or is it just one of those things where we can safely assume that if you're cutting your nitrogen rates that you're already doing something good and you're helping the environment in that way?
So a handful of projects do have direct soil or nitrate leaching measurements through different mechanisms. But that's sort of on a one-on-one basis if it's connected with maybe some other professors here at UW or at other institutions to impose some ways to capture nitrate leaching. Gotcha. But for the most part, we don't. So here we're kind of using, let's see, where do I want to start this? Through our Discovery Farms program, going back, we have a nice data set for nitrogen content in grain and stover, and we can use some of these book values to make assumptions about the nitrogen uptake of the nitrogen fertilizer, right? So if you've got 100 bushel yield increase, how much more nitrogen was taken up, relative to the nitrogen that's applied. And then we can make some inferences about the nitrogen that was used, and then we can kind of put stuff into a category of unused N. Doesn't mean that's the total amount leached, of course, but we can kind of get some estimates of that, and we can kind of provide that back to the farmers. Like, okay, so if you're putting out 160 pounds of nitrogen, and we can say, oh, well, on every 100 pounds of it was used, that efficiency might not be too bad. But in another case, if it's like you're putting out 160, but really only 50% of it was used, ooh, that's a lot of unused N that I'm paying for. What's going on here? Gives farmers some ideas of like, oh, maybe I want to try something different, right? Oh, maybe that's the field I want to side dress instead of broadcast at the pre-plant, or I want to split apply or do something different, right? Yep. It just gives them more information about like, this was in these fields, nitrogen was, efficiently used, and these ones, a little bit less efficient use of it. And those are ones maybe to target for one. Well, just for maybe there's some economic return to be had. One, and then certainly there's an opportunity for to reduce some nitrate leaching.
So I wanted to move on to another topic, something else that you study specifically and have done some work on, and that is the combination of applying manure and using cover crops. So I was curious, is this something that like you're seeing an increase in, and so you guys wanted to look at some specifics of, parameters of how we can optimize that system? Or was it just kind of a passion project and something you were hoping that people would start doing and wanted to put some information behind it?
Well, just like anything, I track what the early adopters are doing.
Sure.
And try to conduct some research to quantify benefits, potential trade-offs. So it's a very specific system here, though. We have a lot of corn silage production in the state. So about 25% of all the corn that's planted in Wisconsin is harvested for silage, right? Okay. What that is, it's the full biomass removal. There's some stalks left in the soil, but not a lot of residue covering the ground.
Right.
And often that's happening in September. So a lot of time for some potential erosion, runoff to happen. So, but also a time where you could get a grass cover crop like rye planted and get good growth for erosion control. It also typically, obviously corn silage associated with dairy production systems. Also, it's a time in the fall where manure can be applied, right? So we have sort of all these levers being pulled. You've got a lot of exposed soil. You've got manure being applied September, October, November, 6, 7, 8 months before the corn is planted. Yeah. So that's a long time for that nitrogen to sit out there. So you can have a dual benefit of growing a cover crop for some erosion control and then trapping some nitrate, some of the nitrate and have some reductions in nitrate leaching over the winter months. And so we've done a lot of work, and there's been a lot of, especially as CAFOs get bigger and they're under a lot more pressure in terms of their nutrient management. It could be a good tool that could have a lot of benefit. And so we've run trials at a lot of our experiment stations. We've run trials on farmer fields, mostly on winter rye, and that'll survive the winter. So you do have to go terminate it in the spring. And what happens is generally what we've found is that, so we have to think about this from a nutrient management perspective. So if you're putting out manure in the fall and you have an expectation of there's going to be a certain amount of nitrogen available for that next corn crop, right? So let's say you put 10,000 gallons of liquid dairy manure. Let's say it's 80 pounds of anticipated available N. So that'd be like a fertilizer N equivalent, or a 80-pound nitrogen credit, we may call it. Well, if you're putting a cover crop out there, does it change that? And so in a perfect world, the cover crop would just trap the nitrate that was going to leach out over the winter, over the spring. And it does that, but it also taps into some of the nitrogen that was going to be available for that next corn crop.
Sure.
And so generally what we found is ideally you want to keep your cover crop biomass below 2,000 pounds. You don't need to grow this amazing crop of a cover crop. You just need, ideally it's somewhere between, 1,500 pounds is kind of a sweet spot where you have enough for soil coverage. So you get that erosion control, but it's not so much that it's going to start to affect you needing a lot more nitrogen. Generally speaking, if you're below 1,000 pounds of biomass, it's not going to change your manure nitrogen credit. And what we found, if you're between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds, so basically a ton of biomass, of course, we've got a good document. I don't remember, I think, maybe 8 inches tall, less, maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. 6 inches is maybe really all you need. It is going to tap into it. Somewhere between 30, it's going to reduce it by 30 to 40 pounds. So you're going to need your nitrogen credit for your manure will be reduced. Now, okay, so it sounds like, okay, that's an agronomic disadvantage, and it is. It'll cost you, right?
Yeah.
The comment I always make is that there's a price to be paid to the conservation gods, and that price is in nitrogen. But here's the good news. So there's two pieces of good news, and the bad news is now you got to pay more for your nitrogen. But one is, in years where there is substantial leaching losses, that will also reduce the nitrogen credit of your manure. So in years when we run these trials, when there's a lot of leaching, especially in the spring, then like there's kind of some specific conditions. You can imagine if you have really warm falls, that manure mineralizes quite rapidly. Then you have a lot of leaching losses, especially in the late fall or early spring, that's going to leach out that nitrogen. The net effect is kind of the same. We don't see a big difference. And it's because the availability of the manure was greatly decreased because it leached out.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter if the nitrate leaches out or if the cover crop captures it. The net effect is the same. So in years where there's a lot of leaching, we'd rather have that nitrate captured in the cover crop, right? And the effect is then minimal. But we don't really have a good way to assess if your manure nitrogen credit is reduced with a lot of leaching losses. Well, we do. You can test some. You can do some soil tests and stuff like that. So, but I don't know. Manure is its own beast, right? It's a little more variable in terms of its N availability than maybe we acknowledge in our nutrient management planning programs. So in cases like that, cover crops are great. The other thing too is when the cover crops take up that nitrogen, our work, we got some data hot off the press. It suggests that nitrogen stays in the soil system. So the nitrogen that the cover crop takes up, it's more likely than not to stay in organic matter or organic matter fractions. And then thus going, especially, and then if you're using cover crops somewhat frequently in rotation, could be going to help build organic matter or improve soil health. So you're also getting maybe that third benefit, right? We have erosion control, we've got water quality benefits, and then long-term building of soil health. And so that's the good news. Rather than that cover crop, the reason why we need to apply it more also is because that rye cover crop doesn't decompose rapidly and then release the nitrogen, right?
Right, yeah.
It decomposes slowly, mineralizes slowly, but that seems to be good because then it stays in the soil. It doesn't just decompose and then can be leached out at some other point. It seems to be staying in the soil. So that's the good news.
That is good news. And as you were talking about how there's that difference between, well, without the cover crop, you could leach that nitrogen and it's lost that way. But with the cover crop, the cover crop can take up that nitrogen, and you look at it both ways and intuitively you're like, well, that's nitrogen loss regardless. But there's what you were just talking about. I think that opportunity cost of that cover crop having taken up that nitrogen. And what you guys are finding sounds like that it's not leaving the system. It might take a little bit to give back into the system, but it's not completely lost by any means.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Okay.
You know, obviously there's going to be a lot more work on this over time. And, you know, we've got a second year of trial coming out. Hopefully we see the same thing in year 2. I should have put a little disclaimer, preliminary data, 1 year of data, but kind of exciting data. So it's hard not to tell people about it. But
yeah, no, that is exciting.
Can I do say one more thing though? It's like cover crops aren't all sunshine and rainbows. And especially when it gets into planting it in September, planting this winter rye in September, it is possible that we get too much growth of the cover crop, especially if it's a wet spring. We can't get out to the fields to terminate it. We start getting to over a ton of biomass, especially 2,500, 3,000 pounds of biomass. Now we can get into when the quote unquote real problems arise, tend to be in those situations. It can take up, you know, in some cases, almost all of the manure nitrogen and like almost eliminate our manure nitrogen credit, can lead to some substantial yield losses, especially if the following spring and summers are dry, because that cover crop also is taking up nitrogen and we're focused on, but as it gets bigger, it certainly take up water and starts to take up water at deeper depths. And so our recommendation always is to get out and terminate that cover crop as early as possible. If you are starting to get into situations where you're really producing a lot of biomass over time, I think there's a couple different options. Ratchet down that seeding rate of rye. I think it's with some of our work, we can have some nearly almost as good of erosion control with a 30-pound seeding rate of rye versus a 60-pound seeding rate of rye. So you could try that. You could switch to oats or spring barley. Now, this is Wisconsin. They winter kill here. I'm not sure how much stuff winter kills in Illinois. So you have to kind of look at your regional variation. But the ones or any grass cover crops that winter kill, so then they die. And in a lot of cases, we can get some good enough fall growth that we have enough dead biomass coverage in the spring to kind of be helpful. Or maybe split the difference. Put a mixture in of a rye and an oats or something like that, where half of it's going to die out and you have and then you have half of it surviving. You know, so there's a lot of things. If you're getting into conditions where like this has now become a problem year after year, I want to grow cover crops for erosion control, but it's producing too much biomass and I can't get out in the spring to kill it. Then there's some other alternatives for species and mixes and those sort of things and seeding rates to try to keep that biomass as low as possible.
Yeah, those are really good points. I think that a lot of the time we're only focused on the fact that with cover crops, there's such a short window to get them in and get growth established. But with the situation you're talking about with, you know, post silage or post wheat even, you can be on the opposite end of the spectrum and have that too much biomass issue. And that's a whole other beast as well.
Well, you mentioned post wheat. And so we have a lot of winter wheat in Wisconsin. Now you have some real opportunities for cover crops.
Absolutely.
We're talking legume cover crops, and we're talking red clover. We're talking Berseem clover, things that can put on a lot of biomass, things that Berseem will winter kill. Red clover, you could terminate in the fall or let it grow into the spring, put on a lot of biomass. Now we got these legume cover crops that decompose and release the nitrogen to that corn crop. And now we're talking pure nitrogen benefits. 40, 60, in some cases, depending on the biomass, 80 pounds of nitrogen being supplied that you can cut back. So if you're growing wheat or a small grain, you have an opportunity to get a cover crop planted in August, plant a legume, especially if your next crop is corn. Clear benefits. And often we see yield bumps too following this. Right? So there's some potential dual benefits of that. And so problem with we just can't get enough, we can't get legumes established late. They don't grow. So that's the one downside. But legume cover crops are fantastic. You know, if you have some opportunities to grow them, I highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah. Post wheat, I think those producers have a really fun opportunity to play around with some really fun things. So yeah, that was a great thing to reference. And I was wondering, we were talking about how, these cover crops can hold nitrogen. Some release it obviously easier than others, depending. And a big question that I hear producers asking all the time is, how long is it going to take for that nitrogen to come back into my system? Do you do research on that? Do you know of any research being done on that that's working to answer that question? Or is it a question that has too much nuance and is just inherently difficult to answer to?
Pass. Okay.
That's fair.
Legumes. So like just legumes decompose, so it's like the biochemistry or organic chemistry of the plant itself, or how fast it decomposes. Mm-hmm. Legumes get back right away, right? So it's just how that plant decomposes.
Yeah.
The grasses. Okay. So if it's staying in the soil system, when you get it back, I think there's two big factors with this. One is, how frequently are you using cover crops in rotation? So if you're planting cover crop once every 5 years or 8 years, like, you're not going to see much of a change. Sure. If you can have these covers planted every other year, certainly every year, but maybe even every other year, we've seen some success in changing maybe some. I haven't gone as far as. Let me step back. We are lacking long-term data to answer this question, because it requires like a potential decade worth of research, right?
Gotcha.
A continual cover crop use for a decade. You got to have a real change in your soil that would be substantial enough to pick up a difference. Oh, I got this nitrogen back. Now I can apply 30 to 40 pounds less nitrogen. Well, how long is that going to take? It's going to take a long time. At least, minimum a decade, maybe more, depending on how often you use it. Over the short term, I think you'll see some small changes in maybe some soil health metrics. That's a potential. But in terms of like real changes, you've improved your soil enough that you can cut back on your nitrogen. I think it requires pretty frequent cover crop use and at minimum a decade. The only one trial I can think of is out of Iowa. They looked at, I think, continual cover crop use, and after a decade, they saw some increases in their mineralizable nitrogen. We've seen that in some of our more extreme cropping systems with like continuous corn silage harvest. And we've got rye in every year. After 6 years, we started to see some meaningful changes in some of these mineralization patterns. We couldn't quite associate it with reducing nitrogen fertilizer, but your soil will respond the more frequently you use these cover crops. Now, that said, what's the trick? We try to utilize as much of the growing system as possible for corn and beans, right, to maximize our yield potential. So how much time is left over for these cover crops to grow, to put on enough biomass that's meaningful and over time? The big caveat, right, is the system I'm working in are systems where cover crops will grow, and they'll grow really well, right? Because it's following corn silage in Wisconsin, and often with manure, so we're applying a lot of nutrients. These cover crops will grow really well. How much work do we do for corn and soybeans in Wisconsin? Very little. In terms of to be able to get sort of that soil coverage that we need, you'd have to really delay planting that next year to get enough biomass for some things to be meaningful. So what's that look like in Illinois? I'm not sure. So does it require, at some point, is this going to require us planting maybe reducing like the relative maturity of the corn that we're planting to try to have a little time at the end for cover crops to grow if you feel like we need some soil improvement? And then how much can interseeding help with cover crops? Can we get them going a little early? That can be, we haven't seen a ton of success with that exactly, or let's say spotty success. Sometimes it'll establish well and survive. Sometimes it won't. So that's really the challenge in our corn and soybean based cropping systems of, if we want to try to find opportunities for soil improvement, our cover crop's going to really be able to fit in there.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I really appreciate everything that we've talked about. I think it's been really fun, and hopefully speak with you soon.
Yeah, it was great chatting.
Once again, that was Matt Ruark, Professor and Extension Specialist in Soil Fertility and Nutrient Management at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Be sure to join me for the next episode of Talking Crop, for which I'll be speaking with Jonathan Koppes and Andrew Hockenberry with the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at University of Illinois. That episode will release on August 19th. Until then, thanks for talking crop.